Welcome, everyone. For those of you who did not join us during work session, the mayor is attending a memorial service for Tracy Andrus, so will not be attending the meeting this evening. We'd like to start this meeting with a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Corliss.
Here.
Halliburton.
Here.
Morales.
Here.
Nash.
Here.
Stead.
Here.
Willits. Here. All present.
Need a motion to approve the minutes.
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of the minutes for the work session and regular meeting of May 7th, 2024.
Second.
Will the clerk please call the roll?
Halliburton.
Yes.
Morales.
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Stead.
Yes.
Willits.
Yes.
Corliss.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you, council. Special business, we have a number of appointments today. First, let's take up the appointments of Angela Johnson and Eric Stidham to the Parks and Recreation Commission.
Mr. Mayor, I ask unanimous consent of the reappointment of Angela Johnson and Eric Stidham to the Parks and Recreation Commission for 3-year terms ending May 31st, 2027.
Yeah, with that, is Angela and Eric here? Would you like to speak, Angela?
Mr. Mayor, it looks like we were asked for her to speak up here.
Would you mind speaking in the mic? We'd love to have you on the record.
And also, while you're walking up, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your service. I know this is a reappointment and it's so important for so many community members to lean in and keep us on track in the right direction. And as a longtime commission member myself, I know it's not easy. So we really, really are very grateful for your service.
Thank you, council member. And I will say that, serving Parks and Rec kind of is easy because it's so much fun. There's so many good things we get to look at, so many awesome programs we get to do. So like I said, I wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to serve the city that I love, and the constituents that I love here in the city. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to serve.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right, without objection, it is so ordered. Next, we have the appointment of Reshma Kamal to the Library Board.
Mr. Mayor, I ask unanimous consent for the reappointment of Reshma Kamal to the Library Board of Trustees for a 5-year term ending June 30th, 2029.
Is Reshma here? No? Okay. Well, I did chat with Reshma at the Library Board meeting last week, and very grateful for her continued service. Hearing no objections, it is so ordered. Okay, last special business, we have the reappointment of Jamie Boesiger to the Airport Commission.
Mr. Mayor, I ask unanimous consent for the reappointment of Jamie Boesiger to the Airport Commission for a 3-year term ending July 1st, 2027.
Without objection, it is so ordered. Jamie, are you here? No? Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
Just a quick comment here. I haven't had the opportunity to serve with Jamie, but I have served with Reshma, Eric, and Angela. And it's been wonderful serving with all of you. So this is an absolute no-brainer. Thank you so much for your continued service. You've already done a great job. We look forward to you continuing to do a great job in serving the city. So thank you, and thank you to Jamie as well, even though I have not worked with them before.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, Councilmember Morales.
I'd like to speak to just thank Jamie. I don't know if she'll hear this later, but it's amazing to have really experienced folks on the Airport Commission like her that actually experience flying in and out of the airport constantly and bringing that insight into making sure that, a lot of the changes that we're doing there are going to be really impactful in a good way. And that some of the, barriers that are caused by our growth are mitigated. And she's done a really good job highlighting some of those things for the airport. So really appreciate her service.
Thank you. And if I could just give a shout out to our chief of staff. I think some of the agendas that council members have up here might be they're inconsistent. So I think we have right ones, Councilmember Stead and I. But if we could get some updated agendas for other council members, that'd be great. Next, I think that concludes our special business.
Mr. Mayor, are you asking if Cherie Barber should be on?
I
the
do not
agenda?
have Cherie Barber. So could we take a brief recess to get to the bottom of this? We'll be back in 5 minutes. All right. All right. We're bring this meeting back to order. There are conflicting agendas. The public one does not include the reappointment of Sherry Baber to the Parks and Rec Commission. We will take that up at the next council meeting, presumably. And very grateful for Sherry's service. Just talked to her a week ago. And yeah, we'll be happy to entertain that at that time. With that, that concludes our special business. Next, we have the consent agenda. I'd entertain a
Mayor?
motion.
I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Council, is there any discussion? Hearing none. Clerk, please call the roll.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Stead,
Yes.
Willetts. Yes. Corliss.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
All right. Thank you, council. Next, we have ordinances. We don't have any on first and second reading, but we do have ORD-13-24 before us on third reading. I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move that further reading of ORD 13-24 be dispensed with the record and the record reflect that it has been read the third time in full.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. The clerk may read.
Halliburton,
Well, clerk may call the roll, excuse me.
Oh, I haven't, sorry.
Get a motion in a second.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I think it needs to be read in full the third time before I can make the motion to approve.
Could I get
Mr. Mayor.
clarity from the clerk?
Mr.
Or,
Mayor.
yeah.
To dispense with the rules on the third reading, we need a motion and a second. So if the motion is to dispense with the rules, that's the roll call that is on this. We just need roll call. Yeah.
Will the
Yes.
clerk please call the roll?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Stead.
Yes.
Willetts. Yes. Corliss.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries. ORD-13-24, an ordinance amending Boise City Code Title IV, Chapter 1, entitled Nuisances. Amending Section 1 to add the nuisance of personal property left upon public property. Amending Section 4 to permit notice to be provided by property posting. To permit immediate abatement of nuisances posing an imminent or ongoing threat to or impairment of health and safety. To permit a 24-hour notice period for the nuisance of personal property left upon public property, and to enumerate the storage and recovery procedures for abated personal property. Amending the penalty provision, approving a summary of the ordinance, and providing an effective date.
Mr. Mayor, I move that ORD 13-24 be approved.
Second.
Any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Stead,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Corliss.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
All right, council. Now we're moving to public hearings. First up is SOS 24-2, vacation of a plat note and easement. First application under the modern zoning code. So kick us off, Sabrina.
All right, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Before beginning my presentation, I would like to acknowledge that this evening is the first hearing where some of the items that the planning team will be presenting to you are applications that have been submitted and reviewed under the modern zoning code, including this application and the next item on the agenda. To help visually differentiate between the two codes, staff presentations for applications under the legacy code will use the blue color scheme that you're used to seeing. And applications under the modern zoning code will use a green color scheme like is shown on the slide right now. So with that, the application before you is a request to vacate public utilities, drainage, and irrigation easements and an associated plat note as it applies to lots 73 and 74, block 11 of Foothills East subdivision number 7, addressed at 2100 and 2114 East Ridgecrest Drive. The applicant intends to consolidate the two subject parcels in order to construct a deck expansion for the existing home at 2114 Ridgecrest Drive. Therefore, the applicant requests to vacate the public utilities, drainage, and irrigation easements located on either side of the shared side property line between the two existing parcels, as well as the associated plat note number 2. The vacation will only affect the subject parcels, and all easement holders have provided letters of relinquishment as detailed in your packets. In conclusion, the planning team recommends approval of the request, and I will stand for any questions.
Any questions for staff, council? Nope. Is the applicant here? Would you like to testify? If you could please speak into the mic and state your name and address for the record.
Mr. President, council members, my name is Craig Kolchak, RCK Consultants. I represent Melanie O'Brien. I'm all for getting this approved. The reason I'm testifying is I saw kind of a hiccup on the approval process. I want to do an ROS, record survey. And in order to do the record survey, I have to have the vacation abandonment first. But I think maybe you guys would consider allowing in the future an ROS to be conditionally approved so that once that the SOS is approved, there's not a long waiting period of review process. They could do it concurrently. And that's all I've got.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And we'll take that under advisement. And you have a bunch of planners here, so they heard it too.
Thanks.
Is there a representative of the neighborhood association that would like to speak? No. Any public testimony? Anybody sign up to testify or here and would like to testify? Anybody online? Okay. Any additional questions for staff, council? Okay. Entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of SOS 24-2, vacation of a plat note and easement at 2100 and 2114 East Ridgecrest Drive.
Second.
All right, council, any discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I guess just to have staff look into what the applicant brought up. So appreciate you bringing it up. Always good for us to look into something to see if it can be a little bit more efficient for folks who are getting through and if it works for staff as well. So I would just direct staff to take a look at it, see what they think.
Thank you. All right, we'll give Councilmember Stead just a moment to come back to vote. All right, will the clerk please call the roll?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Stead,
Yes.
Willets,
Yes.
Corliss.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
All right, council, moving on to the next item, we have SUB 24-2 and SUB 24-3. Garner Vines and Taffy Downs subdivision. We have Jesse presenting to us. Thank you, Jesse.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. The items before you are SUB 24-2 and SUB 24-3. These are two preliminary and final plats for two residential subdivisions on 13.38 acres located at 12371 and 12553 Goldenrod Avenue in an R1B zone within the Centennial Neighborhood Association area. The first preliminary plat, SUB 24-2, for Garner Vine subdivision consists of 13 buildable lots on 8.08 acres, and the second preliminary plat, SUB 24-3 for Taffy Downs subdivision, is comprised of 12 buildable lots on 4.81 acres. And as a reminder, this application is being evaluated under the modern zoning code. The preliminary plats for both subdivisions were originally approved in December of 2021, along with a rezone from A1 to R1B. However, neither final plat was submitted before the original approvals expired. The subdivisions were reviewed together initially as they connect, share an internal roadway network, and are being developed in tandem. Each proposed roadway within the subdivision will be dedicated as public. And the proposed subdivisions will have two access points from Goldenrod Avenue, one serving as a primary access for each subdivision with an east-west connection between. There are also two cul-de-sacs proposed in order to retain an existing home and due to the lack of potential street connectivity to the south. Two micropaths are also proposed to provide additional pedestrian and bike connectivity. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommended the applicant install 10-foot detached sidewalk along Goldenrod Avenue with an allowance for meandering to preserve the existing mature trees. There's an ACHD project in place to fill sidewalk gaps along Goldenrod Avenue with 5-foot attached sidewalks. And there are plans to tie into the ACHD project with the sidewalk associated with these subdivisions. The applicant also has provided an updated tree mitigation and landscape plan as seen on the screen. A recommended condition of approval is for the applicant to work with the community forestry to ensure full mitigation is achieved. And with that, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommends approval, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Mayor, I read through the transcripts from planning and zoning. There was a pretty extensive discussion about the 10-foot sidewalk versus the 5-foot, the meandering in the trees. I want to make sure that I understand sort of the ACHD plan. So I think that they're doing a sidewalk gap filling project. And what I'm understanding is the ACHD, when these new sidewalks come in, they're going to be installing 5-foot attached sidewalks. Will those sidewalks attach directly to this one? Like, is there going to be a 10-foot sidewalk that comes into this 5-foot attached one?
Mr. Mayor, council members, that's correct. Had some discussions with the project manager at ACHD about this project, and they said that they're fully fine and able to tie into the sidewalk network with this subdivision with their gap projects. It's something that they have done before. So,
thank you. And just to kind of a couple more questions on that. So I think what will be happening is that ACHD will be installing brand new 5-foot attached sidewalks, potentially on both sides of this development. And then in this development, we're going to be expanding it to 10-foot detached sidewalks? Question mark?
Mr. Mayor, council members, that is correct. There is some sidewalk on the west side of this proposed subdivision that does exist, and that it would be tying into that as well as into some of the sidewalk gap improvements that ACHD is planning.
And so would the reason that we would be requesting this 10-foot sidewalk be that if those other ones that will be getting brand new sidewalk do redevelop in the future, then we would be requiring those to be 10-foot detached as well?
Mr. Mayor, council members, as part of the modern zoning code, any new development along a collector or arterial is required a 10-foot detached sidewalk. So as is with the requirements for the modern zoning code would be applied to this particular subdivision. And then if there were other subdivisions that would come into the future, it would apply to them as well.
Thank you. And then I guess just my last question on this line, and it's not necessarily a fair question to you. Why is an ACHD matching our modern zoning code? And instead of putting in 10-foot detached sidewalks, putting in 5-foot attached sidewalks? It seems to me sort of, why are we spending money for something that actually isn't part of the plan? And you may not have an answer to that question, but I don't know if you've had conversations with ACHD about, are they updating their sidewalk plan to our modern zoning code?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, nope, sorry, Mr. Mayor, council members. That is a great question, and it has something that is kind of having an ongoing discussion. This particular project has been planned since prior to the adoption of the modern zoning code, and so these are the designs that were in place for this area. I do know that there is some other discussion on how to try to align some of our sidewalk policies, but that is a broader discussion than just today.
Yeah, I appreciate your answers. I realize that those are kind of hard questions to answer with you not necessarily being in control of the ACHD side of the project. So very appreciated.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I just want to add that, thanks for your work on this, Jesse. I think this is a, interesting infill project. I appreciate the preservation of the existing home and the, connectivity that's, being taken into account. So thanks for, helping us get a great project.
Jesse, could you talk about these micropaths? Are these private paths or public paths? Could you speak to that?
Mr. Mayor, council members, so the micropaths are shown in green, and they were part of the original approval. They'd be common lots owned by the HOA, and so they'd be available for use between those streets.
Could the HOA restrict use of those to the public or close them at their leisure?
Mr. Mayor and council members, off the top of my head, I don't remember if there was a requirement for a public easement. I believe there was, however, I'm not quite sure off the top of my head, sorry.
Is that a question that could get answered by another member of the planning staff?
I see Crystal's working on it.
Okay. Alrighty. Well, maybe we can delay the answer to that until we've gone through the public hearing. Any other questions, council? Okay. All right. I guess we'll open the public hearing. Thank you, Jesse. Is the applicant here and would they like to testify? Come on up.
Good evening. My name is Alex McDonald. I represent the property owners. My address is 380 West State Street, Eagle, Idaho, 83616. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we're super excited to bring this project back to this body. It's been a couple years, but it is a evening of firsts. So we are the first subdivision to come before you, the modern zoning code. So we're super excited on that. But I'll keep it short. Again, part of this project is an infill project. We wanted to keep the same look and feel of the west bench, which is larger lots. I think that that really assisted us in discussing it with neighbors when we did the rezone in a few years ago, just because we kept the conformity of the west bench in those larger lots. So we're super excited to bring this project. Both homeowners are going to, of the homes that you see, they're going to stay. They've lived there for decades. They're going to be able to stay there and be able to utilize their properties to enhance that west bench. So we're super excited about that. So we would appreciate your approval.
Could you speak to what's the average lot size on this subdivision going to be?
About a third of an acre.
Okay.
They're quarter acre, a little bit more, up to 3/4 acres.
Okay. And did you have any information on those micropaths, if there was a public easement there that, to your recollection?
Yeah, I looked for my plat notes here in my my folder. I don't have it on me. It's on my computer. You guys may have the answer now, but I do believe they were public.
Jesse?
Mr. Mayor, our councilors, that was not included as a condition of approval. However, that is something that the council can add as a condition if they so choose.
Does the applicant have any feedback on that possible condition?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my only, could you bring up that, what I would, ask that the council consider is the micropath somehow, and staff and I can work on it. The micropath in Gardner Vines, which is to the south that you see, really leads to a private property at this time. So possibly when that gets redeveloped, we can put a plat note, then it becomes public, because as of right now, it would just be individual property owners that would go onto an adjacent private property at this point. The one over on Taffy Downs, which is to your left, that is just fine to be able to have public access.
Was there any consideration? Maybe I don't quite understand the private property that the micropath is leading to. Is there a cul-de-sac just kind of adjacent to it? Help me understand why we would have a micropath to private property. Are we preserving access to a future trail or something there?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, that is private property. The cul-de-sac is on private property. There is no easements, no cross-access agreements that exist. And so the goal in 2021 in working with planning and zoning as well as staff is to preserve a future path if at such a time that that property on the west, 4202 that you see, would get redeveloped.
All righty.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Couple questions. So I think that one of our conditions is we're having you pay into the tree mitigation fund. Is that correct? And explain why you're having to pay into it instead of just getting the trees on the property.
Can
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Phone a friend.
Yeah, members of the council. Can you bring up do you have the pictures from planning and zoning by chance? Yeah.
Are you just speaking of these pictures? Sure.
Yeah, the trees. Trees have been a fun discussion the last 4 years, as well as detached sidewalks. So these pictures will provide a little more context to your question, as well as the sidewalks. That was from the planning and zoning meeting we had.
And one of the things as you're answering this question that I'm hoping to gain from it is the 10-foot sidewalk as opposed to the 5-foot one, even though we're allowing you to meander it, is it making it so that you're going to have to take down additional trees versus if it was a different size?
Yeah, Mr. President, Councilmember Halliburton, that is correct. In the original approval a few years ago, we did have the 5-foot detached meandering sidewalk to preserve as much trees as we could. You'll see from these pictures there are dozens of very mature trees that we try to protect and retain as much as we can. However, coming into some of the new development code where we need to increase that to the 10-foot, that does impact a lot of trees. So therefore, yes, you are correct. That's why, in essence, we're buying into that. If this body would consider a 5-foot detached sidewalk, that would be wonderful. But we do agree with the current development code that that's what it is.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Willetts.
Go ahead. I can ponder on my question a little bit
Okay.
longer.
So thanks, Alex. This is in District 1, so I'm very keen on the consideration of this. I want to make sure that I understand the sidewalk issue and that there's clarity. So the zoning code, our current zoning code requires a 10-foot sidewalk. ACHD only will do a 5-foot sidewalk. So we're going to have a different size of sidewalk as people go in and out. And also we're going to have to take out a bunch of trees that have probably been there for 50 to 100 years.
Yes. Yeah, Mr. President, Councilmember Willetts, that is correct. That's part of the challenges where we had been working over the last couple of years, why we weren't able to get to the final plat is because we were working with many of the utility companies as well as ACHD to solve this issue. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Mr. Mayor. So earlier today, I was walking along Bannock Street. I was walking along Bannock and 3rd Street. And every once in a while, you go by a really large tree. And instead of the sidewalk either meandering or instead of them making all of the sidewalk 3 feet wide, they just make a smaller section of sidewalk next to the tree. I'm trying to figure out, it seems to me like there should be a way to figure out an appropriate size pathway or appropriate size path or sidewalk in specific spots to not have to tear down these trees and still get a detached sizable sidewalk that we're looking for. I don't know if there's been conversations, if you got into that sort of depth at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting or in that sort of depth with staff, but I'm wondering if you could speak to if you think that there's any ways to find a good middle ground where maybe the sidewalk isn't 10 feet wide at every single spot. And we go around the trees that we need to preserve those. If I know that there was discussion of like 6 or 7 feet wide and how that was going to save some stuff. Could you just kind of refresh us on what you've explored so far in trying to figure out a sidewalk that's needed as well as trees that we don't want to tear down?
Yeah, Mr. President, Councilmember Halliburton, thank you, first of all, for, entering into this conversation, because I think it is, something that we always want to preserve is preserving trees, especially very, very mature trees. I'm not sure if staff can get up maybe even a Google Street View of what it is. I think that'll provide a lot of context to the work that we've done, because we originally had that as a separated sidewalk to preserve those trees. The discussion was at Planning and Zoning several weeks ago was understand that we all want to conserve trees. However, their position was to abide by it. And we did request for a reduction to either 6 or 7 feet. We would even do 8 feet just to try to preserve as much as we can. But the Planning and Zoning went with, they decided to go with the new development code and pass this along to you. Yep. We do feel that even at a 6 feet or even 7 feet, we can preserve many trees. We've never, in all honesty, done the comparison between all the landscape plans. We have done a 5 foot, an 8 foot, and then a 10 foot landscape plan to see how much we preserve. But ideally, from a conformity standpoint, we'd love to be able to, in all honesty, match the existing what ACH is going to do with a 5 foot sidewalk to meander. Because these are just some of the trees that you'll see as you come through. Large maples, large poplars, very large pine trees, spruces that the homeowners have taken care of for literally decades.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
If we go down further, I think you might need to turn around the other direction. No, turn it. Yeah.
There they all are. Yep.
So if we go down that road, is part of this subdivision and plat this, I guess there's no trees here. Is that part of this property? Yeah. Okay. And we think in the mature trees right here are on like the first, I don't know, maybe 100 feet or so.
Yeah, it's about 200 feet. It's all
Yeah,
the way across.
okay.
Yeah, all the way across the front there of Golden Run.
So if you could show me on this, where are the trees on that?
Mr. Chair or Mr. Mayor, council members, the existing trees were going to be the ones that are labeled in either red, yellow, or blue, where the sidewalk is meandering on the screen.
Mr. Mayor, question for Jesse. Is it meandering because of the trees or just for fun?
Mr. Mayor, council members, the sidewalk is meandering, and that was a discussion that we had with the Planning and Zoning Commission to allow meandering in order to try to retain as many trees as possible.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah,
I
Councilmember
have a
Willetts.
clarifying question. So we're taking out 31, is that what that says? 31 trees? 31 trees? My glasses.
Mr. Mayor, council members, there'd be 31 unhealthy or undesirable trees and 18 healthy trees. So the ones in red would be the unhealthy or undesirable species. The ones in blue would be the ones being removed that are healthy. So by the sidewalk, there's about 5, I believe.
Okay. So in terms of what is undesirable, is that based on growing conditions, or is that based on the fact that the tree is dying?
Mr. Mayor, council members, that's something that we do require an arborist report for. So an arborist will look at each tree individually, and the undesirable could be because it's an invasive species. It could be because it was a tree that wasn't intentionally planted and it's not growing in a place that will allow it to thrive long term. There's a variety of reasons.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions for the applicant? Any other parties of the applicant wishing to speak?
Mr. Mayor and council members, I'm Matt Swenson with Innovative Housing Solutions and the developer on the Taffy Downs side of the project. This is Neil Colette, who lives in the Taffy Downs side of that project. His home and garage are the two existing buildings. We get that pulled back up, showing that access path. The two circled buildings in yellow, the one on my right is his existing home, and the one on the left of the path is his existing garage. The concern with that pathway is that accessing the garage, is it to your home? Go ahead.
Neil Colette, 12553 West Goldenrod. The home is that area marked in, I can't see
Yellow.
which lot. It's the garage that we have for our home is the one that's next to the home between the canal that runs through there underground. On the other side of the micropath is my barn. Taffy was our horse. And that is my workshop. We plan on building a retirement home on that lot. The biggest problem that we see here is that to have a micropath there, it's fine with me, except I can't get in and out of my garage without running over the micropath. And likewise with getting into and out of the barn area or the workshop area and into the planned home that I have. So I would love it if the micropath wasn't there, but they required that of us. And so it's going to have to be what it is.
But as you can see, it bifurcates private property buildings owned by the same landowner. It's a little odd. It's like running a micropath through your lot and where your home is. So it's a little bit of an odd placement, but in order to put it in, we didn't know really where else to put it, as those buildings already exist, so.
They want
Mr.
the
Mayor.
two streets to be connected is the reason the micropath is there. And that's the only reason that it's there.
Councilmember Morales.
Yeah, just a question for you. In the subdivision plan, those two properties will be separate properties for the future though, right?
Yes.
So that micropath is now dividing two properties that forever will now be their own properties.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. The existing home and the new home will be separate properties.
Any other questions for the applicant council?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember.
I would like to put a finer point on that previous question to make sure that I understand. So the existing garage and,
Could you speak into your mic, Councilmember Willett?
yes, but I'm also trying to see. So, the existing garage, the yellow circles, right now it's owned by one property owner. I want to make sure that I understand that in the future, it would be sold as two. And so the path cuts through your private property today, but that won't always be the case unless someone buys both of those lots. Okay, thank you.
So just to confirm, the applicant is in agreement with staff with the exception of the micropath right here? And maybe
Correct.
some
Yeah.
questions about the sidewalk?
Yeah, but we deal with it rather than slow things down.
Okay.
But it does pose a little bit of a problem for accessing the existing buildings that will stay in the new construction of the new home on the newly created lot. So,
All right.
thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Mayor, I had,
Councilmember Wiltz?
I also have a clarifying question. So thank you for talking about the micropath. I just would like to better understand the tree situation because, we hold on to these trees.
Yeah.
We live in a desert. Sounds like you've had some negotiation with city and also planning and zoning. What would be your preference?
I would prefer, Alex has been much more involved in that conversation as the Garner Vine side has much more of that existing treescape. But my preference would be a 5 foot that matches the same width as the ACHD sidewalk that meanders through the trees seems most natural. 10 foot in this, on this arterial road is a big sidewalk, and that it would be the only big sidewalk. If there's a picture of maybe more of the surrounding areas, do we have that above showing the properties from both left and right of us? You'll see that to the west of these new subdivisions, there is really fairly newly developed projects. Obviously, across the street from us, we have some detached sidewalks, but it's 4 foot if it's 4 feet. I'm not sure that's even that big. But to the west of us, it's new construction. There's another maybe empty parcel down even farther to the west. But across the street and to the west, there's a tower, like a cell phone tower, that is owned in a big lot that probably won't go away for a long period of time. What I'm getting at is there's really nothing that's going to be a new subdivision until you tear new subdivisions out 120 years from now. So this literally, I think, will be the only 10-foot. Yeah, you can see down and across, that's the school. Down out that way and go ahead.
Press Kennels.
Right.
Is
So we may be able to get 10 foot in there, but it's like 2 little places in there. And so my preference, since you asked, is I think a 5-foot meandering sidewalk would be appropriate through that treescape and with the new trees that we have planned to put in.
Mr. Mayor, follow up. So I think what I hear you saying is that I'm walking down the street or I'm biking down the street and all of a sudden it's like super freeway
Giant.
and then back to
Right.
what it was.
Yeah.
And if I'm a regular everyday Boise, and I'm like, why is this happening this
Yeah.
way?
I think that's what most people would think. There's no density in there. These are fairly large lots. The sidewalks will be fairly unused. And I get 10-foot sidewalks in a high density location, but this isn't that. This is we've got a great orchard or a great vineyard off to the west of us that'll, maintain in the new subdivision. So this doesn't quite feel high density to me.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Morales.
another question for you. Can you, I don't know how the best way to do this is, but point out the ways that you pull into both of those garages currently.
Sure.
I have questions kind of about how that micropath is, the curvature of
Affecting
that. But if you could just help us understand how and where are people pulling into those in the future?
Neil, do you want to do that? Is there a pointer or something anybody's got?
Mr. Mayor, council members, I might be able to help with that a little bit. So there is access to the lot, I believe 5 off of Paint Street and only on Paint Street. And so that would be how vehicles would access the lot to the west. And then the lot to the east actually has the common lot for the micropath goes around that cul-de-sac. So there is no direct access onto Paint Street from on that eastern lot. The access would be from the north.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, staff, you might be able to answer this then. So I'm looking at the Google Map version of this, but the eastern lot, it looks like you'll head out north of the garage up. I'm kind of curious about that western lot. Are they coming out of kind of that more, I guess, southeastern sloping side, or is it from the more western point of that? I guess I'm just kind of curious. Sounded like they'd be backing out onto this micropath. I just wanted to know, is that the only entrance to that garage? And just confirm that.
And hey, Mr. Mayor, before you answer, is it possible to bring that up on Google Earth so that we're all looking at the same thing?
Thank you for taking so much time on that. It's been a concern for our landowner there.
Yeah, so maybe if we can hover the cursor over the entrances to that western garage. Exactly where is the garage door? On the west. I think I'm.
So Mr. Mayor, councilors, again, so the eastern property would be accessed from the north because that's where they have the street frontage and access. They wouldn't have any access from the cul-de-sac extension. And the western property only has access from the cul-de-sac extension, does not have any access from the north because there's no street frontage proposed on that side. We don't allow the creation of double fronted lots for that reason.
Where's your barn door now, though?
I think that's what I'm mostly curious about is on that western garage. It almost looks like there's like a planter or something, kind of in where kind of alongside where that micro path is. But where exactly do you pull into that? I think
Is the
it
entrance
looks
to the
like
barn on the
there.
north side of the barn?
There are two entrances.
Okay.
There is a man door currently on the east corner
Mm-hmm.
of that,
The northeast
And-
corner?
on the east corner of the barn. On the center of that northeast side of the barn, there is a roll-up door.
Okay.
12-foot roll-up door. There is also a roll-up door on the southeast facing of the attached shop area.
Both basically facing the house area.
They-
Get in and out of that, it's pulling in and out of that.
So there's,
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Halliburton.
I want to be a little bit careful about how much we're trying to design from up here. I think one of the reasons why there's a micropath required is because we typically don't allow cul-de-sacs in a neighborhood like this. And so that there would have to be some sort of micropath connection to a different part. So I guess what I would ask of you is if this is not the area where you're going to have a micropath, is there a different place that you would like this cul-de-sac to go? Because I think that that's a discussion that we would be able to have, but I don't think by allowing you to have these cul-de-sacs, we would be able to not put in a micropath. So if you have a proposed area where you would rather have it go, but that would require redevelopment of
Yeah,
your
no,
lots.
we're ready to go. We just wanted to bring it up as an option. If there was a way to blitz it, we'd love that. If not, then we'll
Yeah,
just say, okay.
because I don't know where a micropath would go. I would certainly be open to you deciding if there was going to be another way that you could connect to that public street. But if there's not another way to connect, directly to the east or somehow to the north to connect to it.
Yep.
With the cul-de-sac, with our policy, that's what we would be requiring.
Okay, we'll leave it there then. Thank you.
Thank you, applicant. And thank you, Councilmember Halliburton. Public testimony. Anybody signed up to speak? Anybody online? Okay. Any additional questions or comments for staff?
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Question for staff. You can guess it's about the sidewalk and trees. One of the reasons why we have our new zoning code and 10-foot detached sidewalks on collectors is because that's what we want to see in these types of areas. And I don't necessarily wouldn't feel comfortable going against what's in the new code, but I also think that part of our job is to make sure that perfect isn't the enemy of good, that we figure out what we can do within our code to allow for multiple different desires. So when it comes to addressing, climate change, trying to preserve as many trees as possible and our different efforts that are there, what types of mitigation have we done, could we do to still allow that 10-foot path, but be able to flex or give wiggle room in those areas to preserve those trees? Is it making it all one width of 6 feet? Can we go from 10 feet to smaller areas as needed to preserve the trees, or do we have some options there?
Mr. Mayor, council members, I am not an arborist nor am I a landscape architect, so I can just give you some of the options that we talked about in the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing, and also some of the allowances that were allowed based on the original preliminary plat approval. At the Planning and Zoning hearing, there was a lot of discussion about the sidewalk, how allowing for meandering to preserve as many trees as possible seemed like the best compromise while also getting the 10-foot sidewalk that is brand new in our zoning code in order to not go against our new ordinance. However, um, meandering doesn't necessarily guarantee that all of these trees would be able to be preserved anyway. Until you actually do the construction, you don't know all of the root damage that could happen. So there is that allowance. Originally, in the approval of the plats in 2021, they did allow for a 5-foot meandering sidewalk because that was the standard at the time. So there's been a lot of discussion around how to preserve these trees best and what exactly that looks like. I think that with the tree mitigation and arborist reports, we do have a little more information on how many healthy trees are in danger of being removed or potentially damaged. But we also have a lot more information about how many trees we could potentially save.
Great. Thank you.
You have any questions or comments for staff? Okay, all right, all right. I would just add, we made the zoning code, and I want to adhere to it, but we made it for us. It wasn't not the other way around. We weren't made for it. So I would want us to do what's best for this part of town, not necessarily what's best for a zoning code that we're proud of and is new and we're still working through it. So I just add that comment.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Could you remind me of the request that you had earlier about, I believe it was deed restricting the micropaths?
Yeah, I want to make sure there's public easements on both of those, so that they can't be. Yeah, I want to make sure there's public easements on both of those. Okay. Anything else from the
Mr. Mayor,
public? Yeah,
I had
Councilman.
a clarifying question
Yeah.
on Councilmember Halliburton's question. Are you suggesting that you want to ensure that those public easements are called out within the record? Or do you feel like that it's already described as such?
The staff said that the public easements are not included, so we'd have to
Call those out?
condition that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I, with the rest of council, want to be fully supportive of our new modern zoning code and for the things that it calls out there. However, I think there are going to be situations as we work through this new zoning code that some items may not be ideal. And I feel with this subdivision, which is a great infill project, it seems to blend with the surroundings with the large lots. However, I don't feel that a 10-foot wide sidewalk may be as appropriate as would a 5-foot wide sidewalk. And it'd help mitigate a lot of these large trees that have been around, and we can't buy large trees. I mean, this is very important for the city. I think having an extra wide sidewalk is not as important as preserving those trees. And
Mr.
I'm
Mayor.
wondering if that's something that we can consider.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank you.
Councilmember Corliss. I think at this time it'd be appropriate to close the public hearing and get a motion on the table before we start debating. I probably kicked that off with my comments, so I apologize for that.
Yeah, Mr.
Councilmember
Mayor,
Halliburton.
I think getting into deliberation after a motion would be great. I'm going to move that we approve SUB 24-02 and SUB 2403 with the following modifications to conditions. One, that we make the micropaths public easements, that we keep the condition of requiring a 10-foot separated sidewalk when possible, but allow the applicant to reduce the sidewalk down to 5 feet if it means being able to preserve trees in the area.
Second.
And Mr. Mayor, so the goal here is that, like, yes, let's get the 10-foot sidewalk in there. I would remind council that there is a park just down the street. This is probably how a lot of people are going to be walking or potentially biking to that park. There are quite a few areas here that are going to be redeveloped. Some of them won't be, but there absolutely are sections along this route that will be updated, and we do have the ability to put in those additional 10-foot detached sidewalks. This is something that we actually see on applications a lot, and it's always sort of hard to require a developer to put in something when a neighboring property doesn't have or isn't going to be redeveloped and maybe has something smaller. I would vocalize that it's really, really tough to require somebody to put in 10-foot sidewalks in our zoning code when there's going to be brand new 5-foot sidewalks being put in by a partnering agency along the same street. And I think that that's a disconnect between the city of Boise and ACHD that makes it really tough for our developers. But by making the pathway 10 feet where we can, reducing it as needed to preserve those trees, I think that that's just not letting perfect be the enemy of good. Let's get the sidewalk in here that we need, but let's not tear down any trees that we don't have to in the process. And if we look all over our city, especially in the north end where we have these huge, beautiful trees, we're constantly reducing sidewalk so that we can keep and hold on to some of these trees. And so that's the nature of the motion.
Mr. Mayor, for a substitute motion,
You'd have to,
we have to vote on the first one.
no, you have to there'd have to be a motion and a second to support that. So you have to move for a substitute motion.
Okay, so, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move for a substitute motion. I move approval.
And
for-
we'd have to move to consider a substitute
Okay.
motion. So is there a second to consider a substitute motion?
Second.
Will the clerk please call the roll?
Halliburton,
No.
Morales,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Stead,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Corliss.
Yes.
5 in favor, 1 opposed, motion carries.
And now for a substitute motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve, subdivision, I was like, which ones? Yeah, actually, thank you. Yeah. I move approval of SUB 24-00002 and SUB 24-00003. The preliminary final plats for Gardner Vines and Taffy Downs subdivisions located at 12371 and 12553 Goldenrod Avenue in an R1B residential suburban zone with the following conditions. 1 is that the easements be public. 2, in which the sidewalk is reduced to the 5-foot sidewalk that would align with ACHD's.
So to clarify, is there a second?
Second.
So to clarify, the differences between the motions are public easements on the micropaths. They both include that. And then the other difference is that Councilmember Halliburton's motion is 10-foot where possible, 5-foot meandering otherwise. And the substitute motion is 5-foot sidewalks.
I would say 5-foot I would add to the motion 5-foot sidewalks that meanders to save as many trees as possible.
Okay. All right. So the only difference is no requirement for 10-foot sidewalks where needed. Any discussion on the motion, substitute motion?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to talk a little bit about this. First of all, I'm really excited about this development. I'm excited that there are big lots. I think that it's really important that we have choices in Boise. And, we have apartments, we have townhomes, we have big lots. This is a very beautiful part of town. Right now, as you walk down that, it's just a road. And so any sidewalk is going to be more. What I don't want us to do is to have a beautiful 10-foot sidewalk that then goes to a 5-foot sidewalk that then goes back out. I think that that is just not common sense. And I think people who are walking down the street will be like, why did they do that? That doesn't make any sense. Why did they do that? Well, we did it because it was the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law. And the spirit of the law is connectivity. It's the ability for people to get around. It's already a very wide street. I think that there's an opportunity here for us to make sure that we keep the cohesiveness of the neighborhood while still having a lot of space for people to go, just based on the size of Goldenrod.
Councilmember Morales?
Yeah, I really like these motions. Been really struggling, obviously, with staying true to the modern zoning code that has been developed. But I think the point was raised that we have a partnering agency that is doing something different adjacent to this property, and I think that kind of sets us apart. I tend to feel the same way about a sidewalk that is going to be varying widths around trees, just from a walking perception type thing, especially if you're on a bicycle, maybe going a little faster. I think having consistency and being able to maintain some of those mature trees is probably kind of the best thing in my mind. And so I appreciate Council Member Willitz's decision or motion here. I think I will be supporting it. I'm a Pioneer Elementary School alum, and that's down the road as well. And so I just envision folks being able to use these pathways and having a more consistent pathway through this property as opposed to kind of squiggling in and out at 10 and 5. I think just is probably going to be a little bit more user-friendly, more common sense.
Mr. Mayor, I will not be supporting the motion. I support the staff's decision to recommend 10-foot sidewalks. I think that we've heard for many years, every time we ask a developer, require a developer to add sidewalks, we get pushback. The 10-foot sidewalk is the new sidewalk. I imagine that we're going to get pushback on that from here on out when we require that of developers. We know that our streetscapes are not built overnight. So although it's not in other places on that road, at one point there weren't sidewalks at all, right? And we ask developers to build that as they go. And eventually we end up with blocks and blocks that have sidewalks. So for that reason, I won't be supporting the motion. I do definitely support the public access to the paths. I know it's inconvenient for you now, but I don't think this is going to be, a micro path through the neighborhood and through your property or through the two properties is going to be such a barrier. It will just be a path after all that you can step over or walk on. So I support that public access there. And ultimately, we're looking at the long term here. Those will be separate properties with separate owners, and we need to be building for that future state.
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the substitute motion. I won't be voting in favor of the substitute motion. There's a total of 5 different properties on here that will be developed at some point in the future. We know that it will happen because some of them are bare ground and some of them are infill. And so that means that every single time this comes in front of council, we'll potentially be going against our zoning code instead of being consistent with our zoning code in some spaces where there's 0 trees whatsoever. To be clear with my original motion, it's not to make those sidewalks 5 feet. It's to have them be 10 feet where possible and down to 5 feet where we can't. I think it's important to note that the reason we have 10-foot sidewalks, so that if there's 2 people, in a wheelchair, somebody with a disability, they can actually pass each other on the sidewalks instead of a 5-foot sidewalk that makes that more difficult. And so where we can have those wider sidewalks when possible, there's a specific reason there for it. And again, I don't want to let perfect be the enemy of good. I think that those trees are important as well. But I do think that there's opportunities where that sidewalk could be a little bit narrower to preserve some trees and still get that width, knowing that there's going to be future development in this area. And the developer said that it's not a real dense area. It's not at this point, but there will be more density coming to that area, just like you're building and putting infill in that lot. There's going to be more kids walking down to that Montessori school, to that park as well. And I think it's important that we have, the best amenities that we can where we can, while also not, getting rid of an amenity that's important like a tree as well. So again, appreciate the motion, but I won't be supporting substitute motion.
Councilmember Corliss.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate that this is the first application for subdivision coming before this council, because it goes to show you that we do have some a little differences in the way that we're thinking through things, but you can tell that we all put a lot of thought into what our modern zoning code should be and will be going forward, and what makes sense for our developments today. I will be supporting the motion that's been put forth by Council Member Willis, because I think that in this particular situation and in this particular area, that a 5-foot sidewalk makes the most sense to preserve the trees while providing adequate accessibility. And with the micropaths, I think it's a really great development. I'm so happy to see this infill. Thank you for bringing it forward.
I like both the motions, could live with both of them. I think Councilmember Halliburton's motion is a good compromise, and I think a lot of this, based on the mapping of the trees that we see here, I think a lot of this path is going to be 5 foot anyway. So for that reason, I will be voting against the substitute motion. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Halliburton,
No.
Morales,
Yes.
Stead,
No.
Willetts,
Yes.
Corliss,
Yes.
Nash.
No.
3 in favor, 3 opposed, motion fails.
All right, and the original motion is before us. Clerk, please call the roll.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Stead,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Corliss.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
All right. Next item, SUB 23-42 Lim High State subdivision. This application takes us back to the legacy zoning code. Welcome, Matt. Take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The item before you is a preliminary plat for a residential subdivision comprised of 7 buildable and 2 common lots located at 8322 West Lemhi Street on 1.1 acres in an R1C single-family residential zone. And just a reminder that this application was submitted and reviewed under the purview of the Legacy Zoning Code. This item was previously heard by the Planning and Zoning Commission on February 5th, 2024, along with the associated plant unit development. The commission unanimously voted on both items to approve the associated PUD and recommended approval of this preliminary plat. The applicant proposes to demolish the existing single-family home and the accessory structures on site in order to develop the 7-unit subdivision, nearly maximizing the allowed density of the lot. The subdivision will take access from Lemhi Street in via a private road with attached sidewalks on both sides. Lemhi Street will also be improved with curb gutter and detached sidewalks with street trees. The recommended conditions of approval are summarized on your screen. Of note, these included a revision to the landscape plan to provide drought-tolerant landscaping and additional perimeter landscaping, as well as to provide an arborist report to calculate the required tree mitigation. Of the 71 caliper inches required to be mitigated, 38 inches were proposed to be mitigated. In response, the applicant has agreed to pay the assessed value of 33 caliper inches into the Community Forestry Tree Mitigation Fund. And here's a revised landscape plan with those revisions incorporated, basically with more perimeter landscaping and including drought-tolerant landscaping to the site as well. Late correspondence was received prior to the February 5th, 2024 Planning and Zoning Commission hearing, which was the form of a final copy of agency comments that was received from ACHD, which provided the exact same languages as was provided with their draft copy, which was included into the original project report. At the hearing, one member of the public spoke in support of the proposal. The proposal is compatible with the surrounding area and complies with all requirements of the Legacy Zoning Code and is supported by Blueprint Boise, as was discussed within the project report. In conclusion, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommends approval of the preliminary plat.
All right, thank you, Matt. Any questions for Matt, council? Okay. Is the applicant here? Would you like to speak? Come on up and please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Kevin Flores. I live at address 5100 West Bellevue Street. I think Matt did a great job of summarizing the project. It's essentially an infill development, 7 buildable lots, 2 common lots. Something that I just wanted to note was we received through discussion of the neighborhood meeting and planning and zoning meeting, the neighborhood association and neighbors were really pleased to hear that single family homes were going into a single family neighborhood. There's R1C surrounding the neighborhood. This is currently going to be R1C. There will essentially be single family homes in a single family neighborhood. Currently, the property has an existing home. There has been discussion and we've received concerns from the neighbor association and nearby property owners that they have bonfires and loose dogs on site. So obviously with this development, we'll be demolishing the existing home. New development will hopefully reduce the loud parties and there won't be any obstructions from the current lot.
Do you plan to keep the loose dogs, or is that not part of the?
I think that's
agreement?
not part of it.
Okay, all right.
That may be included. But as conditioned, the proposal meets all dimensional requirements in the development code and is supported by multiple goals, principles, and policies with the comprehensive plan. The applicant is in agreement with staff findings and conditions of approval, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Any questions for the applicant, council? Okay. Anybody from the neighborhood association here that would like to speak? Nope. Public testimony. Anybody here in person that would like to speak to this? Anybody online? All right. Any further questions for staff? Nope. Close the public hearing.
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of SUB 23-42, a request for a preliminary plat for residential subdivision located at 3822 West Lemhi Street in an R1C single-family residential zone.
I'll second.
Any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Mayor?
I heard Councilmember Willits first. So we're gonna give it to
Jinx.
you.
Jinx. I'll be voting for the motion. I am really glad to see lots of variety tonight here at City Council. And again, single-family homes I think are really important to have in Boise. I mean, there's an acre and 7, so it's not as if these are big lots, but I do think people need choices, and this is a great choice for folks. And so I just thank you for offering that as a market opportunity. Thank you.
Councilmember Corliss.
Mr. Mayor, again, I appreciate this infill development. While I was campaigning, I heard the most from renters wanting single-family homes, and we need these single-family home development. So I'm really happy that you're putting this out there, and we'll be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Further discussion, will the clerk please call the roll?
Halliburton.
Yes.
Morales.
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Stead.
Yes.
Willett.
Yes.
Corliss.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
All right. Matt, looks like we got you again on final item of the night. Appeal of CUP 23-79 at 2730 West Airport Way. We'll give you a minute to pull that up and take it away.
Thanks again, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The item before you is an appeal of condition number 2 associated with the approval of a conditional use permit for a drive-up establishment associated with a proposed coffee shop located at 2730 West Airport Way on 2.96 acres in a C3D service commercial with design review zone. A reminder that this application was submitted and reviewed under the purview of the Legacy Zoning Code. On March 11th, 2024, the Planning and Zoning Commission heard and approved the requested CUP. Leading up to the hearing, the appellant had expressed opposition to 2 site-specific conditions of approval, including the subject of this appeal, which limited the development to a maximum of 19 parking spaces. After thorough discussion of the conditions with questions to staff and the appellant, the commission voted to approve the request, retaining condition of approval number 2 as shown on your screen. The grounds for appeal are summarized on your screen. The basis of the appeal revolves around the appellant's belief that the specificity of the condition of approval restricts their ability to modify their seat count and floor plan, and that the commission's decision to retain the condition of approval did not reflect their discussion regarding the request to exceed the maximum parking count. Under the Legacy Zoning Code, the parking requirements for drive-up establishment are based on director determination. As the proposed drive-up is associated with a coffee shop, it was determined that the restaurant parking requirements most closely align with the proposal's demand for parking. As such, the minimum required parking space count for restaurants is 1 space per 3 internal seats, with the maximum being 1.75 times the minimum. As 33 seats were originally proposed, a minimum of 11 parking spaces were required, with a maximum of 19 allowed. However, the applicant has proposed 30 parking spaces. During their deliberation, some of the commissioners voiced their opinion, their position on the matter. Their deliberation focused on 3 aspects: the City of Boise's climate goals, community gateway principles, and the existing parking and traffic conditions in the area, mainly associated with airport operations. The commission discussed how the inherent vehicular focus of the drive-up use, as well as the request to exceed the parking count beyond what is permitted for this use, and the resulting carbon footprint would likely not align with the city's goal to be net zero by 2050, and the goal to reduce dependency on single occupancy vehicles citywide. They pointed to staff's original recommendation to replace the excess parking with outdoor seating or landscaping, and described how replacing the excess parking spaces with landscaping could mitigate some of the adverse impacts to air quality associated with idling cars in the drive-through. The commission also discussed how the proposal, as well as the request to exceed the maximum parking allowance, did not align with community gateway corridor principles, which are intended to protect and strengthen the visual character of the city's primary entrances by enhancing the site with specific design criteria, such as reducing the size of surface parking lots and ensuring that they are screened and located in the rear in relation to the public right-of-way. In this instance, both could be accomplished by replacing 11 of the 30 parking spaces with additional landscaping or outdoor seating. Finally, deliberations turn to how the proposal may augment the demand for parking as it relates to airport operations. However, the CUP request was for a drive-up establishment and not for an accessory surface parking lot for the airport. The locations and the amount of public parking spaces for the airport are dictated by the airport master plan, which currently provides over 4,000 public parking spaces in the area. Therefore, it is not the responsibility of private development in the vicinity to accommodate this perceived demand for additional public parking. Further, the legacy zoning code allowed applicants to exceed the parking maximum via a formal request, but since one was not submitted, those required findings were not reviewed as part of this application. In conclusion, the submitted grounds for appeal and the associated memorandum do not demonstrate an error made by the Planning and Zoning Commission. The planning team recommends City Council deny the appeal and uphold the decision made by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And for reference, the standards for appeals of hearing body decisions are on your screen, and I will stand for questions.
Any questions for staff?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I have a question. Thank you. Can you go through in your mind what should have happened in terms of more parking? It sounds like there was a bureaucratic step missed, and I just want to make sure we all understand what might have happened. So could you explain that?
Mr. Mayor, council members, the legacy zoning code allows for commercial buildings that are less than 5,000 square feet to exceed the maximum parking via a formal request. And basically that's just some kind of written request that is submitted to the planning team, reviewed by the planning team, and then also via director determination either granted or not. And then additionally, there are specific findings as well, which are on this screen, very similar to CUP requirements about potential adverse impacts that excess amount of parking could contribute.
Matt, is it fair to say that you ran a similar process to how you would have evaluated the formal request to how you evaluated the conditional use permit and the appeal?
Mr. Mayor, council members, procedurally, no. The formal request wouldn't require its own CUP. Although these are the findings, it wouldn't require a new application. But the application of these findings, yes, is similar to how a CUP finding is reviewed and according to a plan.
I don't think I'm asking procedurally. I think I'm asking like materially, or if we would have been a formal request, would we have anticipated a similar result based on the findings that you've presented to us today?
Mr. Mayor, council members, yes, I would say that that's fair to say, yes.
Okay. All right. No further questions for staff. Is the applicant who's also the appellant here? Okay, come on up. State your name and address for the record.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Stephanie Hopkins. I'm with KM Engineering. Our address is 5725 North Discovery Way in Boise. I'm here on behalf of the developer and Connor Lindstrom, who originally was the presenter to the Planning and Zoning Commission on this application. We really appreciate staff's help with this whole process. It's been quite a timeline in which we've been working with them on site plan revisions as well as just through the appeal process and kind of understanding what the conditions imply for future development. I do have a member that is representing Starbucks here too, Ms. Sunderland, that can speak if there's anything that I can't answer. So we, as you know, the CUP was approved for a 2,800 square foot restaurant, the Starbucks restaurant and drive-through on March 11th. We had quite a discussion with Planning and Zoning Commission at that time regarding parking, and then there was also sidewalk discussed along Vista and Airport Way. We're here this evening, as Matt mentioned, to appeal their decision specifically related to site-specific condition number 2, and that's really just to open discussion on that condition that addresses the maximum number of spaces that are available to the site for it to develop in the future. There are a few things that we think support our request. We're specifically basing our request on item number 6 within the standards of review for appeals, which is the decision was not supported by sufficient or substantial evidence. There are a couple things I think that go into play there. Councilwoman Willets asked if there was something procedurally that could have been different from the beginning, and there was. As Matt mentioned, there is a waiver that can be requested at the beginning of the process. We probably would have done so if we'd recognized that we were exceeding parking requirements based on the potential number of seats. So when we initially submitted the application, we thought, it'll probably be about 33 seats. Didn't know for sure that that was going to be the final number or that's where we would land. Staff wrote their condition with a specific number based on that seat count, which is kind of where we're at today. And that's the specificity of that condition is really what's limiting the site going forward. And the reason we think that P&Z probably didn't have the full understanding of our request and staff's interpretation of our request is that we didn't have an official waiver in there noting that we wanted to exceed what would be the maximum count for the 33 spaces. So I'll go into more detail about that as I kind of talk through.
Could I interrupt you there?
Yes.
So are you suggesting that you didn't know what the maximum count would be because what variable was not determined prior to the working with staff on this project?
Mr. Mayor,
What's the
so
variable?
what I'm suggesting is that this was kind of a tentative number of seats. This is a new building design. We worked with staff quite a bit on screening to Vista because it is an entryway corridor, as well as resituating the site. It's kind of a challenging site. There's a pipeline that crosses through it. There are a couple of other constraints that we had to work through. So this is a brand new building for Starbucks. This is something they designed specifically for this site. And at the time, they didn't know if they were going to be going with kind of their standard seating or if they'd have more kind of a stadium seating situation. So originally, they were contemplating 33 seats, but now that they're into design and looking at it closely, they're thinking they can get closer to 50 seats. So if we were to propose 50 seats under the legacy code initially, it would have allowed us up to about 29 and a half spaces, I think, with the 1.75 being considered. And we're at 30 spaces currently. So that's kind of, I think there was some missteps on our side, obviously, and not knowing exactly where we were going to land on the number of seats that led to providing information that wasn't fully vested by the P&Z Commission.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. So this is the vicinity map of the area. As you're all aware, this is really close to the airport, and there are a lot of other businesses and commercial uses in the area. The location is the primary reason that we'd like to make sure that the site is adequately parked. As staff mentioned, and as I think Commissioner, I'm trying to remember, one of the commissioners, Mooney, had mentioned, it shouldn't be the onus of private development to provide parking for the airport. We completely agree. That doesn't change the fact, though, that folks will likely use this parking lot as they use the Chevron parking lot and other adjacent parking lots to wait for planes to come and go. And so, the primary reason that we want to make sure this is adequately parked is that it can serve Starbucks customers, whether they are waiting for planes or whether they're just grabbing a drink and going. We specifically designed the site so that it would work well with the number of spaces that would work for the building.
Mr. Mayor, while you take a breath, I've got a question.
Thanks.
So I know this area well, obviously. Some of the areas around the airport charge for parking and they use it as a valet service. Is that the intent of this property? Or is the intent to be able to have enough seating for those who are attending the business and then also those who are waiting and may have bought a coffee but are just waiting?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Willetts, that's a good question. The intent is not to charge for parking or to treat it as a valet. It really is meant to be a parking lot for customers of Starbucks. And so, I mean, I think Starbucks recognizes that because of the proximity to the airport, it'll be a really great opportunity for folks to hang out while they wait for someone to come in on a plane or they wait for their plane to depart. And so with that, there will be likely more folks waiting in the parking lot. But that's not, the intention isn't for it to be a wait kind of situation. So this is the site specific condition that we are requesting to discuss this evening. So as I mentioned, we specifically work with staff to develop this new building based on feedback that we received throughout this. I think we started working with staff back in March of last year, redesigned the site quite a few times. During the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, I think there were a couple of things that we should have elaborated on more. So initially, we were requesting to remove this condition, and we were also talking about wanting to exceed the number of parking spaces and made that request to the commission at that time. So we were under the impression at the time that a conditional use permit would have been required for that request because we hadn't submitted the official request with our initial conditional use permit. We were recommended by staff to talk with Planning and Zoning Commission during the meeting so that we could make the official request to them because it couldn't be noticed and, all the things that are required for public hearings. During that meeting, staff did tell the commission that a conditional use permit would be required. So we kind of went through the findings. In their memo, they do note that it would actually have been a waiver, which is a staff reviewed administrative decision. And so I think that kind of changes the dynamic of that request a little bit and would have changed probably our approach to the application and the request. Another component of that is that, with the number of seats that we were proposing at the time, technically we would have been requesting to exceed the parking maximum allowed. But with the number of seats that we're contemplating at this point, it would really be in compliance with code. And so that's really the crux of what we want to discuss this evening is just to allow us to have a condition that would simply comply with code rather than being limited to a specific number of spaces. There was discussion from Moore and Gillespie about parking early on. Moore had mentioned that, her understanding was that based on code requirements, the number of seats would dictate how many parking spaces you would have. So that led our team to believe that, there might have been a little bit of a misunderstanding on the commission on how code would be applied to this project, even though there's a site-specific condition that limits us to a number of parking spaces. We believe that the omission and misinterpretation of the zoning code initially with the waiver request versus the conditional use permit led to a little bit of a misunderstanding on Planning and Zoning Commission's part, and that the final decision was made in error because it appears that at least one of the commissioners understood or misunderstood how the code would apply. Gillespie also spoke about parking, and he did mention that he could go either way. He didn't really care, but he didn't see harm in having a specific number of spaces that we'd shown. And I believe the chair had also mentioned that he thought it was well designed for the number of spaces. So this is our proposed site plan that we had proposed initially. So this shows 30 parking spaces, 2,800 square foot building. We have a queuing lane that will be adequate to serve cars, obviously. And we've incorporated a canopy that'll be within the building that kind of bridges and acts as a nice barrier to vista. So with the change that would be required to lose parking spaces, we would essentially be removing parking within probably the eastern portion. We would redesign it maybe a little bit, but there'd be this void space that wouldn't necessarily be just landscaped, as I think a couple of the commissioners had mentioned, or maybe staff had mentioned in his memo. I don't know what code requires, but I don't know that it would just be turf and trees. I think that would just be kind of a misuse of the amount of property that's available for the site. So, this is the floor plan that we're currently contemplating. So as you can see, there's a variety of tables, but there's also quite a few stadium seating options. And those are really, those are kind of just like spots where people can hang out. There's not a whole lot of real estate taken up with them. And it'll be perfect for folks that are waiting for planes. They've also incorporated some kind of nice viewing areas to try to capitalize on people that are waiting for the airport and other things there. So, and then, so again, our request this evening to appeal their decision is really just to provide the opportunity to have a discussion with you all about revising the condition to comply with what code requires, legacy code. So we had submitted this application under legacy code that required 1 parking space per 3 seats. And so as I mentioned, if we were looking at 50 seats within the restaurant, not exterior outside seating, that would be about 29 spaces. So we'd be.
Could you speak to, how are we counting seats inside the building? I think I had saw something in the staff report about stadium seating. Could you speak to how we're counting seats inside the building?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor. So and Lisa may be able to give you a little bit more information on this just because she's really familiar with Starbucks's design standards. But my understanding is that the stadium seating is really just kind of a standard, a seat that has maybe like a bar or it doesn't have necessarily like a table that's associated with it. So it doesn't take up as much space. It's more of like like a little small, like. Do you want to come up here and maybe, sorry.
I'm Lisa Sunderland. My address is 1281 East Magnolia Street, Fort Collins, Colorado. And I appreciate the mayor and council for listening to us tonight. Basically, this is a custom design building for this site to be able to take in the views from the airport, to have some place for people to stop, have a community area. And then, of course, if you're waiting to pick up pick up people at the airport. So in doing so, and I think there's one, can you show the one exterior? I think you can see it better on the exterior of the stadium seating, which is where the guy in the red shirt sitting. They're basically graduated going up so people can sit. There's a smaller space. They don't have it's more like being like a community table as far as being a little closer together. So those are how the seats are counted. So originally, when we were asked to give a seat count, the design of the building wasn't finished. The floor plan wasn't laid out. And in doing so, they're trying to maximize, basically having the people be able to see, to be able to see the planes and have kids and families to be able to sit there. So that's how the seats are counted between the 2 top tables, the community table, and then the stadium seating. So now we're looking at 50 seats.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think with that, the condition that we're proposing instead of the original condition, which specifies a specific number of parking spaces, is really just to comply with what code requires, which would be 1 per every 3 seats, and then include some verbiage about, the maximum number based on the square footage of the building. So respectfully, we do really appreciate your consideration this evening. And then this is important to Starbucks. And I think this is going to be a really great site for the store as well as the city of Boise. I know it'll be heavily used and we're excited for the project. So I'll stand for questions if you have any.
Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great spot for a Starbucks there. I could envision a lot of folks even staying at the hotel, coming over and using it before they go to wherever it is that they're going to go. So I guess I'm going to make some assumptions and please tell me if I'm wrong. My assumption would be that Starbucks actually has a bunch of different styles of buildings and different styles of seats that they typically are going to be, building for sites, whatever they can fit. I guess I'm wondering if you were wanting to get more seating, why there wasn't a better plan put forward when it was given to staff, because staff is going to have to make some sort of decision based off the material that they have.
Sure.
And so I'm trying to figure out why did it jump so much? And if, why didn't you try to get the higher amount of seating in there from the get-go?
That's a great question, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Halliburton. I think at the time we didn't realize that it was going to be used to limit the site in such a constrictive way. And so it was really just kind of an offhanded conversation with staff, is my understanding. where they were asking, how many seats are you proposing? And it was, well, we have something similar like this here. It'll probably be around 33 seats. Not recognizing or not being able to look and see, exactly what different kinds of seating options they'd have. So I think, looking back, obviously we should have given them more of a range and thought a little bit more about how a condition could be written.
So it was more of a conversation. You didn't give them an actual like floor layout plan that showed where all the seats were?
Correct. Mr. Mayor, Councilman Halliburton, I think that the floor plan that we provided, I don't know that I have it in here. It didn't have a number of seats shown in our initial application. It had elevations and then like the outside elevations and renderings, but no actual floor plan.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question for staff. So given this new information, I guess, would staff support the change in parking, or do you stand by the original recommendation?
Mr. Mayor, council members, as conditioned, 19 parking spaces, undoing that calculation, so 19 could accommodate up to 57 internal seats. So for that reason, planning staff would not be supportive.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I have a couple questions, and maybe that might be for both of you. So
Let's keep it to the applicant for now,
Okay.
and then we'll go back to staff.
all right. One of the things that we do at city council is kind of sit as judge and jury on these things in an appellate form. So we don't rediscuss everything that planning and zoning did. We have to look at very specific things. And so as part of the standards review, we have 6 things that we have to look at. Can you point to a specific appeal criteria that you feel like this would fit under?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Willetts, we're proposing that the specific finding for an appeal that is being met here is that the decision that the Planning and Zoning Commission made was not supported by substantial evidence. And that was in part because of the lack of our information provided on the potential number of seats, as well as some misdirection provided by what the process would entail for a waiver request. And so that's our primary, that's what we're positing with this appeal.
Mr. Mayor, I have 2 others. The question was asked whether staff would support more parking based on the new number. You heard the answer. Do you have a disagreement in how you view the regs? Because you gave a different number.
Sure. Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Willetts, I think they're looking at it as, they're not looking at the maximum number, which is under the legacy code. I'm not sure if the current code has the 1.75 allowance in it. But I think as far as like a business is concerned, they would need more spaces to accommodate the number of seats that we're proposing. And that's just logistically how Starbucks would like to run their business. So that's what we're requesting. But staff's interpretation, I think we've talked to them about it a couple times. And I think, obviously it meets what the code requires, but I think in the spirit of what the code would want for this kind of use, you'd want more parking spaces to make sure that it's not impacting adjacent properties or impacting the customers that actually want to use the site.
One more, Mr. Mayor. So this is a bit of a crystal ball question.
Yeah.
Because we are straddling 2 codes here. If Starbucks was to resubmit with updated numbers, do you believe that you would get increased parking?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Willetts, I have not considered that question. I think that the zoning district changed with the new zoning code change. And so it's a mixed use district now, which would require probably some different design elements. And I'm not familiar enough with the parking requirements, so maybe staff can speak to that a little bit later, but it's certainly, I think, might be an option. I don't know that Starbucks would be interested in pursuing that avenue, but thank you.
Do you have any further testimony, Stephanie? We kind of took you on a number of questions.
No.
You get okay.
Thank you.
All righty. Let's see. Anyone from the neighborhood association present or online? Public testimony limited to parties of record. We don't expect anyone from the public. Any final questions for staff?
Mr. Mayor, can you answer the question about what the modern zoning code would allow in this area for perspective? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, council members, generally applying the set of rules from the modern zoning code to the legacy zoning code is not recommended for many reasons. There's a lot of different criteria. There's a lot of different perspectives that they don't really align, and oftentimes adds confusion to discussion. That being said, the modern zoning code in general has a direction that moves away from vehicular orientation. So, and not having reviewed this proposal under the purview of the modern zoning code, my assumption is that the modern zoning code would require less parking and have a lesser maximum as well.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Howard.
I read through quite a bit of the planning and zoning meeting, but there was quite a bit of ground to cover. One of the reasons why we have conditional use permits for drive-throughs is because there is some goals to have less auto-centric driving. And I think one of the points that was brought up is that there is this amount of parking, but there's actually more cars parked on the site. At many times you can think of the drive-through that potentially has another 10, depending on, what time of day, and Starbucks is popular. So usually a lot of cars. So do we factor in those cars that are in the drive-through? Is that why we try to go for that lower standard? Or can you explain to me a little bit about why we would aim for a minimal standard for parking for a drive-through?
Mr. Mayor, council members, good question. The parking calculation is based on, focused on the amount of seats, right? So for every 3 seats, 1 parking space. It doesn't take into account the amount of cars that are proposed to queue in the drive-through lane. So those two are completely separate from one another. And I'm sorry, there was a second question in there.
I think that's fair enough. I think that during the Planning and Zoning Commission, so here's the second part of the question. So the reason why sometimes for these drive-throughs that we do aim for more of the minimum standard and not always the maximum standard is because we know that there's going to be additional car-centric use at the facility already. Yep.
Mr. Mayor, council members, yes, and I think that's I think that's echoed, demonstrated within the minutes that the inherent vehicular orientation of the site, is already producing a lot of vehicle trips and therefore carbon generation. So I think that the the minutes demonstrate that the commission took into consideration the amount of cars being, utilizing it for both reasons, and in an effort to reduce carbon emissions, reduce surface parking and urban heat island effects, kind of led to the reasoning behind their decision to retain that condition of approval.
Great, thank you.
Any further questions for staff? Matt, are you aware of any park and wait at the airport that the city is considering? This is probably not your jurisdiction, but
Mr. Mayor, council members,
he's gonna take it on. Okay, all right.
I know that the cell phone lot, which is a phrase that I learned from this application, that there's plans to move it to where the existing economy lot is located, and that the city has received a quote for that work, but doesn't have a definitive timeline other than it's slated to be completed sometime this summer, is my understanding. And it will be expanded.
Okay. Any other
Mr. Mayor?
questions? Yeah.
I'm just going to speak to that since it came up right now.
Do you have a question for staff or you have a comment?
No, anyone else with any other questions can go ahead.
I'd probably let's get a motion on the table. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay.
Closing the
Yeah, I think we'll close the public hearing.
Mr.
And
Mayor.
entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move that appeal of CUP 23-79 be denied and that the decision of the Planning and Zoning Commission and conditions of approval be upheld. I do not find that there was a demonstrated error in the decision of the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Second.
Councilmember Morales.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I did not see error in findings from our planning and zoning in this one. I think it's tough for the applicant wanting to find that opportunity to look at this a different way. I think a lot of the discussion centering around this area is important. We have parking maximums in the legacy code for a reason, to make sure that areas are developed to their maximum abilities for all the public. And so, it does do things like prevent heat island effect, massive lots. I think in general, larger lots is probably always going to be good for business. But I think that in this particular area, we do have some unique conditions. Chevron was mentioned. It's very, very packed parking lot. Drove by this empty bank lot that they're looking to redevelop, and there were a couple cars hanging out there a couple weeks ago. I think that's systemic of our cell phone waiting area. I'll call it an area now because it's probably not big enough to be called a lot. But there have been a lot of dominoes that have had to kind of fall to be able to get to a better spot where folks will be able to actually park and sit and not be at a side strip of road like they are now, having to constantly move up and up as cars leave. That is more traditional of what you would see at an airport, at a pier sized airport at least. And so I don't think that it came up tonight again, and it came up in planning and zoning. We don't necessarily want to be encouraging people to have to go look at a bunch of different places to park and wait for passengers. And this is coming from, I sat in the cell phone waiting area a few times in the past year. It's common for me to pick up a guest visiting for business, and so it's just it's one of those things that I think is systemic of where we're at right now, but there are plans in the works to be able to alleviate that. And I think we need to look at, planning and zoning took this issue, I think, seriously. So we have these reasons in code to be able to help us make these decisions, and I stand by their findings.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Stead.
I would just add that I don't think so. We are actively moving in a direction of less parking. And so I don't think even if you had submitted with the original plan at that time that the parking variance would have been really different or granted at that time. Staff said that this accommodates up to 57 seats. And because of our trend to go less parking, I think that that's what would have been pushed initially, even if you had presented with that maximum seat count at that time. So I want to give you that assurance that I don't think, even if you're seeing that as an error on your part to have not submitted properly the first time, I don't think it would have made a difference in our decision.
Yeah.
Councilmember Halliburton.
Mr. Mayor, I do appreciate you coming. I do appreciate the points you brought up. I think that our job here on an appeal is to really look at the standard of reviews for appeals. In which case the main one that you brought up was the decision was not supported by substantial evidence. Reading through the record and then following up with some of the questions from staff, I just don't see that was an error that they made. And so I don't see how we could overturn an appeal without an error that planning and zoning made in that meeting.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I just want to echo what Councilmember Halliburton said is, while I think a business like this could accommodate and have more people park there, there was no error in the findings from planning and zoning. They did a really great job. And as Councilman Stead said, we are moving towards less car-centric, less parking. And I think even if you did come with the exception, it probably wouldn't have been approved. So I'm supportive of the denial.
Mr. Mayor, a couple questions.
Yeah.
This is a really unique part of town. And to Councilmember Morales's comment, there's a lot of congestion here. The cell phone lane is not sufficient. We have record number of people flying in and out of our airport. We all want to do right by the environment, but I don't think 10 less parking spaces is going to save the environment here. I think the reality is that people are going to drive to the airport. They're going to want a place to go. And I think we need to trust our businesses and our private property owners to know what their business needs. So I want to, we've had a lot of conversation about parking minimums, parking maximums here in general. And I think there's places in the town where you would have very minimal parking. I think this is one of those areas where people are going to drive, and they're not going to park at the airport and then walk to Starbucks. They're going to go through that drive-through, or they're going to sit in Starbucks until they get their loved one. So I just want to put that out there from a common sense perspective.
All right. Any further discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Nash,
No.
Stead,
Yes.
Willetts,
No.
Corliss.
Yes.
4 in favor, 2 opposed, motion carries.
All right. Council to entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Folks, we are adjourned. Thank you.